Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Gutenberg Live Show. I'm your host, Joe Casabona, and with me, as always, my good friend, Zach Gordon. How are you?
Howdy, y'all. I'm doing all right, man. Good to be back. There's still Gutenberg to talk about.
There is still Gutenberg to talk about. That's right. So thanks to everybody who is tuning in right now. We are going to talk accessibility today. But there's a few things that we want to get out of the way so that we have the rest of the time to talk accessibility, right? We don't want to end that discussion too early. So the first thing we're going to mention is that 4.0 is out officially. So if you are using the Gutenberg plugin, you can go ahead and download Gutenberg 4.0. There's a few things, a few new features, a few deprecations as usual. But that's not really the crux of the issues anymore. Right? Is there anything that you want to point out in 4.0?
Like you said, a lot of refinements. Like it's worth checking out some of the different things that they're doing. There's some stuff even behind the scenes that isn't part of the 4.0 release that are still nice to haves that aren't even tied to the roadmap that I've been learning about that are kind of interesting stuff with the data model and just overall improvements. But yeah, I think you're kind of right on there with where we're at for 4.0. And this is going to basically be the, I believe, what they're going to start getting ready to roll into release candidate. I mean, there'll probably be a 4.1 and some others, but yeah, get in there.
Yeah, and just as a reminder to people, in the last show, we talked about the presumed 5.0 launch date, which is November 19th. I think a lot of people were holding out for someone to make the decision that, hey, November 19th is bad for all of these reasons. We're going to push it back to January. Zach, I think you were saying in the pre-show that you've spoken to some devs and it looks like November 19th is the date.
So yeah, I mean, I can't speak for the whole thing, but yeah,
Sure.
talk to some people with the project, and it seemed from their perspective that they're excited and building and looking forward to trying to get what they have out. So I wouldn't be surprised if release candidate is, beginning to work on. They're definitely beginning to look at these problems of how do we integrate this into WordPress core. Some cool stuff getting done like dependencies. In WordPress, you could load jQuery as a dependency when loading your JavaScript. Well, now you could pull in most things off of their package repo. So they're working on these integrations of how do we get everything into WordPress, especially with the package architecture. And it's not just a Gutenberg plugin or, a feature. There's a lot of other code that comes with it and how to integrate that. So that's moving along. I wouldn't be surprised if it stays on track for November 19th, at least before WordCamp US.
Right, right. And just as a reminder to everybody that the November 19th date is the day that 5.0 is supposed to drop. I think the first release candidate, and I'm trying to find this, you'd think I would have this ready. The first release candidate is actually due out on October 30th or October 31st, one of those. So we could be looking at the first release candidate of 5.0 by the end of this month. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the development process, the release candidate is or is it the beta? Am I messing up terms here? Yes.
I think it goes beta then release candidate.
Right? It goes beta then release candidate. Yeah, that's exactly right. So, and actually, I have found the release schedule. October 19th, that's tomorrow, is beta 1 and feature merge deadline. So don't know if they're going to meet that, but beta is coming in the near future. And then the first release candidate is October 30th. So I was reading the chart right. I just skipped the line above it. So the beta is kind of this is pretty close to working, but we know that there are still a few bugs that definitely need to be fixed. The release candidate is, we think that this is ready for prime time, but it needs more testing, right? And traditionally WordPress core goes through, I don't know, 2 or 3 release candidates depending on the update. So they're scheduling kind of the first release candidate for October 30th, the second release candidate for November 12th, which is like a week before 5.0 is supposed to come out. So we'll see. That's the schedule now. If you are interested in diving in, I think that second release candidate will be the one that you are going to be most interested in. Though I would encourage you to try out the first release candidate as well. Because again, this is going to be pretty close to what 5.0 is actually going to be. Zach, is that a proper assessment in your eyes?
Yeah, I don't have a ton of intimate details on what triggers a different release candidates or that process, but I think in general, you're right. It is a little bit extra work to sometimes test those versions of it, but might be a good idea to check that out, especially if you're interested in how it's integrating. I think it should work the same as the plugin, right? So if you've been using the plugin all along, then it should be, those are going to be current versions, but the integrations are going to be different, right, as part of WordPress itself.
Yeah. So like a good first test would be get that release candidate, upgrade your site, maybe that's using the plugin and see what happens, right?
So something I'm curious about is like the Gutenberg plugin is going to still exist, right? Because we're just in phase 1 of multiple phases. So I wonder what happens when you have the release candidate and Gutenberg, which one it's pulling off of, or if it's going to start doing different things. So, or at what point you turn off your plugin and turn on just WordPress. Yeah, not sure about that, but
that's a really good point, right? Because previously, like WordPress has been doing these major feature releases as plugins for several years now. But traditionally, the feature plugin either gets disabled or deleted, probably disabled. I don't remember the exact details, but it's at least not working anymore, right? It's basically the same code, and that plugin ends up going away because we don't need it anymore. But Gutenberg is going to enter phase 2 essentially as soon as 5.0 comes out, if it hasn't already started. And that plugin is going to be the place where phase 2 exists. So there's we're entering some new ground as far as WordPress core goes here.
So yeah, that's 4.0. It's worth taking a look in the links through, what is in there. A lot of stuff going on. There's still a lot of GitHub issues being worked out. And like I said, stuff in the track to be released, as well as just other improvements that are going on. Yeah, there's another cool release that they did that I wasn't expecting this quick with the 2019 theme, man. You want to introduce that? I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think we're entering unprecedented I don't like to say unprecedented in a scope like this because it makes it just sound super serious, but this is breaking with tradition, let's say. 2019 has been announced and mocked up and it looks beautiful. I love it. But the little caveat here, if you read the blog post, is that 2019, because it was just mocked up recently, might not be released in WordPress 5.0. And generally understandable, right? I mean, like, a theme's a theme, but about 8 months ago, somebody asked me about theme support for WordPress 5.0 / Gutenberg. And I said nearly verbatim these words: it would behoove the WordPress core team to release a theme with Gutenberg so people can see how nice it can look.
They must be listening, man.
They must be. But that said, we're going to talk about something else very soon that's probably taking precedent over what could potentially hurt the project the most. But I think that if a theme rolls out without if 5.0 rolls out without a theme that supports Gutenberg well, I think that it might not hurt the project, but it definitely won't help it. You know what I mean?
So do you know the details on why it wasn't coming out? I know there's an article here on why default themes change every year, but...
So from what I saw, from what I understand, it's just that the team's been focusing primarily on getting Gutenberg ready. And because there's a much shorter time frame now to get 5.0 out, and they just started work on the theme, the theme was just recently mocked up, things might not, development might not happen as quickly to get it out with 5.0.
All right, I found the phrase here, the exact wording in there. I'm pasting it into the chat here now. Yeah, interesting. It sounds like everything's on a really tight timeline just to get it out in time, like we've talked about in the past, and we don't have one thing, we don't have a theme. We're still going to get it out.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, we made our opinions pretty clear last time about this timeline, and uh, I think that either way, so I think that maybe the strongest argument has come out since that show, right? Because basically the argument of like, oh, it could break things for Black Friday or whatever. People were saying, well, then just don't upgrade until after Black Friday or whatever. Like, fine. Um, but uh, two big pieces of news came out within the last week. The first, and I think probably the thing that kicked off this whole conversation, is I'm gonna say her name wrong. Ryan Reitveld.
Brianne?
Rian. Oh, it is Rian. Oh man. Um,
I believe so. I believe.
I think you're probably right. Rian Reitveld, who was the head of the accessibility team, or worked very closely with the accessibility team at least, um, resigned her post, citing that uh, she feels that Gutenberg. I want to try to find. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but um, too politically complicated for her is the exact words that she used. As far as accessibility, she cites Gutenberg, and then four major problems and getting it ready. Um, so that would that post would then go on to kick off a discussion that's still happening a week later about how seemingly inaccessible Gutenberg is, right? And when we say accessible here, we mean um, for I don't know what the proper terminology is for those who don't use like a mouse, for those who need to use a computer via other methods like screen readers or just the keyboard, or other methods that maybe they can't use a pointing device, right? Uh, so that's what we want to talk about today. Rian wrote that there's been a lot of discussion. Was it today that the core team released a blog post about accessibility in Gutenberg?
Yeah, so that just came out a couple hours ago as of recording this. And yeah, so that was kind of a response at a high level. It's like, well, there are still things about Gutenberg that are accessible. And I think this has raised enough that it's definitely, the team is definitely aware that accessibility is an issue, but there's still kind of been a stance of like, hey, there might still be other things, but we're going to get, I don't know, like, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been kind of weird.
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally the one that doesn't mince words on this show, right? So I will continue that tradition and just say what they say here is good, right? I mean, they say, hey, there's a few things that are accessibility related, but I think it's off the mark. It misses the point, right? The things that I was looking for in reading this blog post were accessibility audit and accessibility testing, because keyboard shortcuts does not accessibility make. Is that how you say that? If you have keyboard shortcuts, that doesn't mean that your product is accessible. There's a bunch of things that make a product accessible. And the thing that needs to happen is a proper accessibility audit from professionals, right? Because I mean, we're all volunteers on the core project, right? Even the people who are on the payroll from Automatic are volunteering their time here. So until we get an honest to God accessibility expert or accessibility team to do an audit, we can't say Gutenberg is accessible. And now 32% of the web runs on WordPress. So I mean, there have been accessibility lawsuits for things like not including alternate text for images, right? if a major part of WordPress is not accessible on the day it rolls out, maybe that doesn't affect the single bloggers or the guys like me, where I still have an accessible front end, but I'm the only guy in the back end. But for bigger companies, for people who have big teams who need to have an accessible admin panel, this is going to be a problem.
Yep, and you bring out a good point. There are, to say that Gutenberg isn't accessible in kind of all the fanfare and pointing things out is probably not the appropriate thing to say, right? There are still serious accessibility issues, but what the team points out is like, look, we've done a lot of these things, and you make the point that those are not all of the things. And there was also an article about, or I guess it was in some comments that like, they had reached out to folks to get an accessibility audit. I guess this is Automatic doing it on behalf of the WordPress project, which again, is kind of weird, shows the highlight of how this stuff is involved. But again, how are the volunteers going to raise the money for it? I don't know. Anyways, that this is something that is looking into happening, will continue to be worked on, but it is a diverse thing. And one of the things that Rhian pointed out was that part of the problem that this didn't work like past projects is oftentimes if it was HTML and CSS, even some JavaScript accessibility, that the contributors and the volunteers could work on this easily. But React introduces one layer of needing to have an expertise, and then single page web app design introduces a whole nother layer, and then drag and drop visual editors introduce a whole nother layer. So this is really, we have people who talk about accessibility in WordPress, very few talks that are at this level of depth and stuff on just having that. So I kind of feel for the community, and I think that part of it is because the project is being pushed fast, but part of it also is like, I think a lot of folks could still learn a lot more JavaScript, and this is a real example of that, right? Myself included, by the way. I'm not just plugging my own, stuff, but it's interesting to bring out the different elements of this, right? Because I think we've talked about some of the core stuff.
Right. And I mean, I was having a similar discussion in Cabo Press last week, where, I was talking about how I would try to write something in vanilla JavaScript, and then I realized like maybe using jQuery was better because it was faster, but also like jQuery has all the proper accessibility things that I would not have thought of. So like even this is maybe the most okay, so there is a lot of controversy, I guess, around this issue for good reason, because people believe that Automatic is hijacking this project or always controls how WordPress core goes. I don't believe that, but it's hard to make the argument when we see something like this where it's getting rushed out, and even by the WordPress accessibility coding standard. I'm going to read this verbatim on the make.wordpress.org accessibility handbook. All new and updated code released in WordPress must conform to the WCAG 2.0 guidelines at level AA. WCAG is an accessibility, let's say consortium. I don't know, web content accessibility guidelines.
Yeah, standards group.
And they have, I think, 2 or 3 different ratings: A, AA, AAA. And each one is a certain level of accessible. So maybe the lowest level is like you have properly contrasting colors, or the font size on your website can easily be resized for people who need that, right? All the way up to a person who can't use a keyboard and mouse can still use this, right? Or someone who relies on a screen reader can still use this website. So I'm not an accessibility expert, but from what I've been reading, I don't think there's a lot of feeling that Gutenberg specifically is part of the WCAG. I've heard people say the WCAG AA standards. Like, I don't know that it would pass. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But that's I think that's, if we're not even going to follow our own standards, what's the point of having them, right?
Yeah, it's interesting.
I knew
Yeah,
I knew I just threw like an information grenade in there by saying like Automatic doesn't control, but do they? Like I really don't believe that. But um when I try to state that case to other people, things like this make it very hard, right? When people feel like um Matt Mullenweg is only pushing this through so that he can have his Apple moment on stage at WordCamp US, when the team isn't even following the accessibility guidelines that they created, when the longtime uh, biggest name in the WordPress accessibility team steps down because of it, it calls a lot of things into question. And I've been in WordPress since 2004. I would hate for something like this to really hurt the project. Um, so I mean that's why I get so worked up, and maybe I'm just reading, like maybe I'm missing a big part of it, and if I am, somebody please let me know. But um, it's it's uh it's important that um the whole community feels heard, right? Maybe not feels heard, but at least when enough voices pitch in on a single thing, I think it's important to address that, which was what I'm going to say his name wrong, but Um,
Matthias.
Matthias was saying with his blog post, right? Um, and I think that's right. People are saying like Gutenberg's not accessible at all. He's saying here are some things that are accessible. Here are the things that we've been doing. I don't want to discredit what the team is doing. Um, but on the same token, I don't want all of the team's hard work to get discredited because this gets released too early.
Yeah. Yeah, and they do make a good point that they are trying with things. I guess I feel like I can't say too much because I also don't know and haven't tested in some high level things. I haven't gone through the list of like, 300 issues that have been, a number of them been closed. I think there's about 90 or 100 left. And I haven't looked specifically at what they are. Maybe there are things that you could throw a dev at and blaze through and get done, which would be cool. But again, to push it out to the community before it's done, I don't really see a good reason for that when the mentality has been, it'll be done when it's done. But maybe a lot could be done in the next month. But I mean, I feel at this level, I don't know how much time and dev is going into that.
Yeah, right.
And I just need to see a true audit. And I guess I shouldn't say that the issues in there might be that audit, and it might be pretty good. I haven't gone in super depth on it, but I am curious to know the gap because I've heard different things at different stages of this, right, to it being completely inaccessible to where someone just cannot use it at all, and that seems weird to ship, given WordPress's, the words we like to use in the community about it, accessible. Yeah. It's always a big push. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lawrence is pointing out a few things in the chat, right, about how Aaron Jorbin has stressed that this is a starting point. WordPress has a belief in releasing version 1 other than wait. There are a lot of contradictions with values in WordPress for the Gutenberg release. And yeah, like release, when you have something ready, release it when it's ready. But don't release it half-baked. Especially when it comes to accessibility. Like the web development community in the last couple of years has made really big strides in the realm of accessibility. The fact that this is a whole conversation is incredible. And every year we could say, hey, WordPress is 30% of the web, 32% of the web. Look at how we need to lead by example. And if our stuff is not accessible, how can we expect everybody else to have accessible websites? Like, I just think like if you're the big dog and you're proud of being the big dog, act like the big dog should act and lead by example. I feel like Ben Shapiro or something. I'm like yelling at the microphone. I'm very hot under the collar about this.
I try to be cool and objective about all this, but even myself at this point, I'm like, how do I spin this? Because I kind of agree, to be honest, man. accessibility shouldn't be an afterthought at this point. There's a lot of tech. It's not that these things aren't possible to do. And yeah, it's not even that taking a couple extra moons to do it and do it really well and have people be like, wow. I do like one thing that Matteo said, which is there's always an extra step we could go. But there's also some that we legally have to do. And I was talking to some students of mine that work at universities, right? And you can't roll it out at a university. There's a lot of institutions where that's not allowed. It's not okay.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And again, this goes back to the point of who's going to take WordPress seriously. Enterprises can't possibly take them seriously. And I said that last week because of the how close the date was to the biggest shopping time of the year worldwide. But this is even more important because if you even if you wait until after Black Friday, if you're rolling this out and it's not accessible, you as a giant corporation, as an enterprise, are subject to legal liabilities because of it. And so
we forgot to mention that in our courses, Joe, about upgrading. It's now a legal issue. You're right.
I know. Geez. I mean, and this is part of the reason that I'm so I'm riled up, maybe, is I've spent since the end of December or January telling people, don't be afraid of Gutenberg. Gutenberg is going to be great. It's going to be a very good thing for WordPress, especially new users. And if we rush it out like this, it's not going to be. If it's not accessible for new users, if it's going to create a headache around a time where most businesses make a lot of their money, and it's going to ruin that, it's not good for users. And, you know, I'll put my ego on the line and I'll say I was wrong. Hopefully other people will be willing to do that as well.
Well, I guess I might be right up there on the line with you. We'll see. Yeah, I'm also just thinking from like a PC rollout, because, you know, we all understand the want to like roll it out and have the fanfare around it, but like rolling it out and it not be accessible and then doing a 5.1 or 2 or 3 where it is a little weird. Because the idea isn't that like, sorry, these aren't issues. It's just that these are issues that we're not going to be able to get to yet.
Right.
Yeah.
And the very reason that, I mean, Matt said this last year at the State of the Word, right? The reason that we are switching from 3 releases a year to will release when a feature is ready, is to do that, right? Or to like rolling releases, right? Because traditionally it was like 3 times a year, right around the same time, you could predict when a new version of WordPress was coming out. And he said, we're changing that to we will release when ready. And probably it was because many people wanted to get Gutenberg out as soon as it was ready and not have to wait for the release cycle. But now that's biting us in the ass, in the butt. I don't know if I'm allowed to say ass on YouTube.
Close your ears, kids.
Yeah. Because now we are close to what would be the next release cycle, I guess. And it's not ready. But we need to stay true to those words. We will release it when it's ready. And it'll be ready when everybody, like the right 30% of the web can use it. Or like 100% of that 30%. Math is really hard. So I don't know. I feel like I'm grandstanding a lot. Zach, like I can just like turn my microphone off and you could talk for a while.
Well, I think also too, like it's such an important issue, but how much can we really say about it? You know, I think we've pointed out the things that this is important. It matters to the community. Brianna, I think, had she not done that and stayed involved, I don't know that this would have been bubbled up. So like props for getting it out, and the WordPress community has no problem hopping behind, you know, hot topics and boiling them up. So my first thought when I first saw it was like, good. If this was my problem, meaning like if I was Matt, I'd just try to throw more money at it and get this problem solved. But I realized, like, can you imagine if Gutenberg was your project and you were trying to hire somebody to do an accessibility audit? That would not be like a 3-month quick overnight thing. So I could see how that would be quite a process. But same time, yeah, how much can we really say about what's the right thing to do versus be like, I get it, but at the same time,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, Rihanna, thanks for bringing it up, and I hope that this gets addressed well because, like you, I've been out there being like, hey, well, I don't know that I say everybody should use it. I often say like, decide if you really need to and understand if you need to, but here's how it's built because it's still cool how it's built. And from a React developer, you don't have, if they build it in the correct way with accessibility, then it's not on you building a block to have to do that. But yeah, there are a few things in there that they are doing, but yeah, not all the way that it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ben makes a good point in the chat. The worst part about shipping it inaccessible is the breach of trust. The very users who most trust us to not release something inaccessible are the ones we can't warn in advance, right? So I think that's a good point. He also said the Fortune 500 company should not be updating on 5.0 on release day anyway. That's another good point, right? But I mean, I think
So
yeah.
here's another like business perspective. A lot of software out there that does big releases, nobody updates on 5. I mean, come on, no, you
Right.
got to let it get to a .1.2, see a few security releases. That is not the history we've had with WordPress. We're an auto update world, but that is an old waterfall method.
Yeah,
How
but
do you warn the people?
right. But the thing is, when when the new software comes out, I guarantee people who are running mission critical sites on WordPress are going to install it on their dev box and evaluate if it's ready to get it on the update schedule. And if 5.0 is not ready, and they have to wait till 5.1 or 5.2 or whenever it's going to be ready, then that, to use Ben's terminology, is a breach of trust. We're using this mission critical software and we can't update to the next major version, not because we're doing something incompatible, but because it's not accessible. So I mean, it's it's a tough conversation to have, and I think that there's a lot of things to consider, but I feel like every week something new comes out where November 19th just looks like a worse and worse date. Um, so I don't know. You said the thing about Matt and like throwing money at it, and I kind of thought the same thing. Like he's dedicated, like he's like donated like $10,000 to like open source projects, but it's not on him, right? It's not. This is not Matt Mullenweg's baby. Well, it's not Matt Mullenweg only his project. Despite like some of my rhetoric, like I know that it's not just Matt; it's a whole team, and I don't want to discount everything that the team has done up until this point. Um, but I do know that people in the GitHub issue for accessibility have said that they will donate money to a proper accessibility audit. So people are definitely willing to put money where their mouth is. I think it's just up to our leaders to lead.
Man, the Gutenberg live show getting real. Normally we're like, here's a block, check this out. But it also raises the thing of we haven't been talking about this until kind of step down. And that's interesting. So I don't know, just want to highlight that again, her for bringing up her voice, because sometimes, yeah, we do have to try to reach out or do other extreme things to get the attention, but still done in a really elegant way and hope it makes a difference. And yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right, right? I haven't been having this conversation. I'm not an accessibility expert. I trust that WordPress is going to be accessible because of their standard that it has to be, right? And my experience up until this point has been good, right? I've run accessibility tests on sites that I've made where I didn't do anything special and they were accessible because WordPress is accessible. Or they at least were accessible enough to get the proper rating I needed, right? Um, so I don't know. And Ben in the chat points out that it sucks that he's going to explain to family that he'll probably be on call on Thanksgiving, right? People are knowingly making a bad decision to release on making a bad decision on the release date. And that's another thing. That's a whole other thing, and we talked about that 2 weeks ago. Um, it just, like I said before, I'm having a hard time seeing the justification to release on November 19th, other than it's enough lead time in front of WordCamp US. So, man, that's real heavy. Is there anything else that we should talk about here before we move on to our like fluff piece?
Oh, gosh. I don't know, man. It is tough. No, I think that Gutenberg, as it stands for a portion of the users, is fairly far along. We still don't have full columns. We've got 2019. It feels like being a little rushed. We've got accessibility flags being set off that aren't being delivered. And come on, Gutenberg.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. That's I don't know. Yeah, I think we kind of addressed it though, and I don't know. I guess the one thing I'll throw in is like they have asked for people who could help. If you have been studying your React and are, accessible or not, but can look into some of the tickets and see if it's something you could help with. That's a call that the team themselves, because we say throw money at it, but like imagine that it is your team, right? People have been crazy busy trying to do their job. So it's not like they could just take on extra work. That would be like someone coming up to you, be like, now you have to do their job too. You're like, dude, that's not my job, bro. Like,
Right.
And then also like hiring people takes time and a process and stuff. But it's, yeah, we're it could work. We'll see. Yeah. They're giving us plenty of material, Joe, at least to keep the show going, right? It's not like we don't have things to talk about.
I know, right? I mean, that's I appreciate that at least, right? It's like how certain politically charged comedy shows do better when certain people are in office, right?
Oh no. Do we have the Jon Stewart bless Kurtz?
So,
well, we got some other good stuff though. You did a piece recently that was really cool. I mean, sorry, we're getting back to Gutenberg now. I know it might seem like we should just end there and be like, bye, but at the same time, there are things about Gutenberg that have been fleshed out. Columns is almost one of them, and I really dig this thing. Maybe you could talk about that you did. You did a little tutorial on styling columns, right?
Yeah. So, and I wrote this for CSS Tricks, which is very exciting for me. I think that Chris Coyer and his team are doing very cool things. CSS Tricks has been, I mean, basically, if you're a front end developer, if you're doing CSS, you've come across, and probably multiple times, CSS Tricks. So it's an honor to be included in kind of their archives, right? And so I wrote an article for CSS Tricks.
And they've been covering Gutenberg pretty well. They've done some Gutenberg articles, which mean they're tuned in.
Yeah, which is again excellent, right? It's nice to see the community at large get behind this, right? It's very nice to see that. And so on October 12th, that was last week, they published an article I wrote called "Styling the Gutenberg Columns Block," where I kind of basically, this is a little bit of a preview for our Gutenberg theming course, or at least a section of it, right? Where I talk about naming conventions. I have screenshots about what you're looking at in the inspector, how naming conventions work, and things like that. And then we go on to styling columns, because out of the box, columns in Gutenberg are not styled. They kind of run into each other. So I just kind of do give you an overview of what you need to do to make your columns look like actual columns on the front end. And they're responsive, of course. And we talk about how nice Flexbox is in this regard, allowing us to resize certain things and give us a nice layout. And then at the end, I plug a pricing table that I did, which I'm like super proud of. I might have plugged it last time too. Also styled with Gutenberg columns markup. So I would love to do more. I mean, I have more of these types of articles planned, where it's almost going to be like a styling cookbook, right? So like, oh, here's how you do this with Gutenberg columns and CSS. Here's how you do this with like buttons or whatever. So if you have any requests, if you're like, hey, I would love how to I would love to see how to style this Gutenberg block to do whatever, let me know and I'll go ahead and work on that. But it's really nice that the kind of jump off for me is out on CSS tricks, because I know it's going to get in front of a lot of people who need to and want to learn how to do this the right way. Thank you.
Love it. Yeah, I think that's a good one. Go check it out. It's definitely something that could use some TLC. And yeah, congrats, dude. CSS Tricks, both to them and you for getting the article out and for them continuing to cover good topics. They got a good article from Laura, I believe, on building Gutenberg blocks. So continues to be a great site out there doing that stuff.
Yeah, I should say that. Like, if you scroll down to that article, you'll see the related links, and they have just like a whole series on Gutenberg, what it is, how to create a block, and a few other things. So, they're doing, as usual, they're doing great stuff there. Oh, and I should say that Chris Coyer is speaking at WordCamp US this year,
No
which
way.
which is like super exciting. So, if there's, I mean, there's going to be a lot of really good sessions, but in my eyes, if there's one that should not be missed, I'm going to say it's going to be Chris's, because he's a great speaker. He's very knowledgeable and like super approachable. Like, every time I've emailed him, he's like, "Yeah, let's do this, huh?" I'm like, "You're so cool." So, uh, now I'm gushing, so it's fine.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, I don't know. I think that those were some of the big ones. Oh, someone's pointing in the chat. Classic Press just announced success in their migration plugin. Yeah, I don't know. That's another one. I'll just have to see how that goes. Talked a bit about them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine, I guess. I mean, it's good to know. Sorry, I don't want to discount the Lawrence who's pointing it out in the chat room.
Oh, it is good because I want to keep updated on Classic Press and how that goes. Curious.
Right. Actually, like a month ago, I was like, this is just a big hissy fit, and now I'm like, I don't know. Maybe this is what certain people are going to need now, but probably not. Just like, don't upgrade.
No, just install Classic Press, dude.
Just install Classic Press forever.
I mean, wait, no, Classic Editor.
Yeah, just install the Classic Editor. There it is.
Yeah.
But cool. Well, that's. I think I probably said more than I've intended to say, so that's all I've got. What about? Oh, we haven't talked about our own stuff. The things that we've been working on, right? So, a bit of personal news on my side is that after two things, actually, if you are a WP 101 member, you can now enroll in my Introduction to Gutenberg course over there. So if you're already giving money to Sean,
cool,
and you don't want to give money to another place to learn the basics of WordPress, totally cool. He has licensed my course over there. So you can totally take the Introduction to Gutenberg course over on WP 101 with all of your other intro to WordPress needs. In that conversation that I had with him and a few other people, I've also decided to separate my Introduction to Gutenberg course out into two separate courses. Basically, what I was doing was targeting two different audiences with the same content, right? I was basically saying, hey, come here to learn Gutenberg. Also, if you're a freelancer, you can learn this stuff. And I was pricing it for the freelancer. So I was not making this course maybe financially accessible to people who are just curious about 5.0. Maybe they're a casual user and they want to learn. So I've separated the course out into two separate courses. So there is now Introduction to Gutenberg and WordPress 5.0, which includes just the how to use Gutenberg lessons. So this is much more appropriate if you want to send your client somewhere, right? If you're like, hey, how do I use Gutenberg? The Introduction to Gutenberg and WordPress 5.0, it's priced at $24. It's much more appropriate for clients or people on your team who just need to know how Gutenberg works. If you are a freelancer, I have updated and created Gutenberg for freelancers. which includes everything in an introduction to Gutenberg and WordPress 5.0, as well as a bunch of resources for freelancers. And that will continue to get updated with things like accessibility news, or now that ACF has a good release candidate out, I'm going to add a module for how to create a block in ACF. That is only going in the Gutenberg for freelancers course. So, and that's priced at $158. I think that is much more appropriate for freelancers who are relying on this for their business. And again, that's going to get updated much more frequently with information to help freelancers mitigate Gutenberg and upgrades to Gutenberg for their clients.
Good, I dig it. Congrats, man. It's cool as we chat and go over this stuff in the show and share about it, like on courses and content evolving. I'm working on something that I've talked about in the past that was eventually going to happen, which is the Advanced Gutenberg course. So I officially began working on that. It's complicated. Unfortunately, a lot of my playing around and working for it was like, oh, I guess you can't do this. Well, can you do it this way? That's weird. So yeah, I put a link up for that in the notes, and you can check that out. That'll be out later this year, but I have it available on pre-sale since I've officially started, and something will come out. But it'll get into a lot of the data API and working with the Redux stores and just doing more complex things. Enough folks have gotten through the Gutenberg development course now that they're starting to ask questions, and I'm like, okay, I got to do that. And I'm also going to go back and redo the current course I have. So I've started to make a list of stuff that I got to do and some extra videos I want to add there. So that, along with the JavaScript for WordPress Bootcamp, learn everything JavaScript and WordPress related in 3 months. I got a new one started in January. I'm about halfway through the current one. So keeping me quite busy.
Nice. Absolutely. Well, keep on keeping on, man. I think I think we're both doing good things, but I mean, your bootcamp sounds really cool, and you are helping people enter the brave new world of writing React primarily in WordPress. So definitely check all that stuff out. And of course, we have our Gutenberg theming course, which is priced very well at $79 right now. So if you want to learn how to convert your theme to a Gutenberg friendly theme, we cover things like block templates, custom color palettes, how to style all of the new Gutenberg blocks, and more. You can definitely check that out as well. So I think that's it. Is that everything?
That's a wrap. I mean, we're doing what we can. If only we had more of us, but we're all doing our part. It's cool, and yeah, I think that covers it well. And where will we, in another 2 weeks when we get on the show, we're going to be talking probably release candidates or hold everything because accessibility is a priority. Let's see.
Yeah. Vote in the chat. Do you think in 2 weeks' time we'll be talking about RC1, or will we be talking about everything is now delayed because accessibility has become the priority it needs to? Let us know in the chat. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Until next time, we'll see you later. Thanks so much. Bye.
Ciao, everyone.